Hello again, marketing friends. So, this week we are gathered here today to discuss personal selling and sales management. I'm actually super stoked. This is one of my favorite topics to discuss in the business world. And interestingly enough, it was something that was just added to our curriculum this year. So, I don't normally get to talk about this in marketing, although it is obviously very related to marketing. So I'm glad this is here, and I'm glad we get to talk about it. This is our final chapter, so we can all be happy about that. Um, a lot of this stuff may seem a little bit obvious and like things that you already know, but I think you'll find that this will be very helpful to you if you do plan to pursue a career in sales, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. So let's talk about why personal selling is important. Okay, personal selling, you might hear me call this sales, you might hear me call it personal selling, professional selling. It's all the same thing. So, just like in advertising, personal selling is so important to integrated marketing communications that it does deserve its own chapter, and you can actually take an entire class on personal selling if you'd like. And the interesting thing is that almost everybody is engaged in some form or another of selling. So, on a personal level, you're probably selling your ideas and your opinions to your friends, your family, your employers, your professors. When you write a paper for me, you're selling me your ideas. Onto a paper, when you're telling your friends on Instagram what next show they should pursue on Netflix, you're selling to them your ideas and your opinions about which show is best. So, even if you have no interest whatsoever in sales as a career, a strong grounding in this topic is still going to help you in numerous different career choices. So, take Harry Turk, for example. He's currently a successful labor attorney, and he worked his way all the way through college selling sweaters and t shirts and other things to fraternities across the country. And although he really loved his part time job selling these sweaters to fraternities, he decided to become an attorney because, bills, life. And when he was asked whether or not he missed selling, he said, "Well, I still use my selling skills every day. I have to sell new clients on the idea that I'm the best attorney for the job. I have to sell my partners on my legal point of view, and I even use my selling skills when I'm talking to a jury or a judge." So, the skills you're going to learn in today's lecture are going to be useful to you in a lot of different careers and just in life in general. So, let's talk about what personal selling is and just the nature of personal selling. Um, Personal selling is the two-way flow of communication between a buyer and a buyers and a seller. So, the flow of communication between a buyer and a seller, usually designed to influence the buyer's purchasing decision. So, this personal selling can take place in a lot of different formats. You can most commonly face to face, but in today's world, this also happens over the phone, over the internet, video teleconferencing like FaceTime, Skype, that kind of thing. Interestingly enough, more than 11 people in the United States are employed in sales positions. And those include those that are in B2B transactions, like manufacturers selling to other retailers or other businesses, and also in business to consumer transactions, like retail salespeople, real estate agents, insurance agents. Salespeople have a lot of different terminology to describe them. You may hear the word salesman or saleswoman. You may hear sales representative. You may just hear rep. You may hear agent. You may hear account executive. All of these people are working in sales. Okay, we talked about those different formats where you may view that. So, you may be considering personal or professional selling as a career, and I want to talk to you about some of the pros and cons of that. Generally, people love the lifestyle that a sales career affords you. So you kind of get to be on your own. You have a flexible schedule. If you decide that you want to go to the gym in the middle of the day and take a 2 hour lunch break and whatever it might be, you can do that. You're out on your own. You don't usually have anybody breathing down your neck. You have some flexibility. You can have a good work-life balance if you want to go to your kid's baseball game. If you want to work from home one day because your kids are sick and your wife has to work, you can do that. As long as you meet your goals and do what is asked of you, generally your boss leaves you alone as long as you meet that objective. So, people love the lifestyle. The variety of the job also attracts people to sales because every day is different. You get to be creative, and every customer has some kind of different problem that has a unique solution. So you never get bored. You're never doing the same thing 2 days in a row. And of course, naturally, sales is a pretty lucrative career. So, uh, ironically, it's actually the highest paying career, one of the highest paying careers for college graduates. So, the average starting salary for someone with a bachelor's degree in business, you're looking at around 50,000 starting out as the average, and top performers earn as much as 150,000 annually. So, pretty good money, especially starting out. Very, very good money. You also get some perks like a company car, maybe a bonus if you exceed your sales goals. So, lots of things out there that are very helpful in making this an attractive career. And then finally, because salespeople are usually the frontline emissaries for their firm, usually they're very visible to management. And what that means is that if you're doing a good job, your performance is usually easy to measure as a salesperson. So, hey, you were supposed to sell this much and you doubled that. So that's pretty easy. It's math. It's quantifiable. It's easy to observe and track. So these people are usually promoted, if they want to be, pretty quickly into higher level management positions that pay even more. So lots of great things to consider here. We're going to take a moment to talk about the value added by personal selling. So obviously, having a salesperson is very expensive. Okay, it's so in recent years, a lot of people have tried to kind of cut them out to save some money. The average sales call costs about $600 on average. That's the estimate, and a lot of people are just trying to cut out the middleman here. So especially retailers, as they've tried to cut out the salesperson, they're requiring the customer essentially to perform the sales function on their own. They have to do all their own research, they have to figure out the product, they have to go buy it, a lot more time for the consumer. So, a lot of firms, though, still recognize and continue to use personal selling as a part of their IMC program because they recognize the value that it adds to the products and to their services mix. So, overall, you need to know that personal selling is worth more than it costs. It's expensive, but it's worth a whole lot more for what you're doing for your customers. I want to talk to you about three specific ways that personal selling adds value for customers. Number one, salespeople can provide information and advice. So let's say that you need some formal wear, like a new dress or a tuxedo, to go to a friend's wedding or to a school dance. You might find it helpful to be able to ask for input from a retail sales associate who can tell you what colors are in this season, or maybe you need to know how to tie a bow tie, how a certain garment might fit you, what the latest fashions are, how long your dress should be for a function that starts at 6 o'clock that night. And sure, you could probably figure out all those things on your own. You can Google a YouTube video on how to tie a bow tie, you can Google about fashion trends, and you can figure out all these things on your own. But many customers find value in and are really willing to pay more for the education and advice that salespeople can provide. It's easier. You don't pay that much more for it as a customer, and it really simplifies and streamlines that process for you. Number two, salespeople save time and simplify buying. We kind of talked about that before, but time is money, guys. Time is money. And customers perceive value in both time and labor savings. So if I didn't have to spend a whole lot of my time looking for something or figuring something out, and I didn't have to spend my labor, trying to tie that bow tie or make whatever it is I need to make, salespeople can really shorten that process for you. So another example, in grocery stores and in drugstore chains, a lot of salespeople are employed by a vendor that supplies merchandise. And they will straighten the stock, they'll set up displays, they can check the inventory levels and write orders and reorders. I think about soft drink sales specifically, where a lot of these salespeople and truck drivers bring the merchandise in and stock the shelves themselves, like people who work for Coke or Pepsi. And these are all tasks that otherwise the retail employees would have to do themselves. But because of Coke and Pepsi, they don't have to do that. It's already done for them. So That's kind of nice. Um, and also to appeal to the end customer, manufacturers might send some salespeople into stores to do different things, like maybe give a free sample or host a cooking demonstration. In this case, the vendor is increasing convenience for the customer, the retailer, and the end consumer. So you kind of get to kill two birds with one stone. So salespeople do save time and they simplify the buying process. And then our third major takeaway is that salespeople build relationships, and relationships bring you money. So building strong marketing channels is obviously important. We've talked about that many, many weeks now. Um, and who in the organization is better equipped to manage this relationship with all these different marketing channels than the salesperson, the frontline emissary for the firm? Who better to do this than the salesperson? Um, and obviously, the most successful salespeople are those who go around and build relationships with their customers. And this doesn't really matter in the type of job, whether you're selling yourself as a job candidate, or you're selling a product that's produced by your company, or you're selling a concept to a client. Your sale is not going to be successful if it leads to only a one-time transaction. Okay, we don't want one-time transactions. We want a lifetime relationship. So, good salespeople consistently take a long-term perspective. And this long-term perspective usually demands an effective customer relationship management program. And this is a goal that's being transformed with mobile approaches to what in the past has been a really dreaded responsibility of salespeople. So I want to give you an example. And I think I may have talked about this briefly in another video lecture, but I bought my vehicle. I drive a Toyota Highlander, and it was a used vehicle, a 2013 Toyota Highlander. And I bought it used at Flow Toyota in Statesville, North Carolina. And I tell everybody this because I will never buy a vehicle anywhere else. Flow Toyota is great. They do all no haggle pricing on vehicles. They only sell used cars, not new cars. And the price you see on the website is the price that you pay. So if it's listed at $17,999, that is exactly what you're going to pay, not a penny more, not a penny less. And that's awesome. They do no haggle pricing, so it makes the car buying process a lot less stressful because you have no one to haggle and discuss with. But even more so, they have a great customer relationship management program. They email twice a year, and they call pretty regularly to check on you to see how you're doing, if you're still liking your vehicle, if it's working well, if you're ready to sell it, if they can help you with that and get you into a new car. They stay in constant contact with you and check on how you're doing. Every year I get a personal phone call from the guy who sold me the car on my birthday. And he says, "Are you still liking your car, Mr. Harrison? We hope you're still enjoying it. When you're ready to sell, let us know." They throw in specs like oil changes and things as a part of the follow-up process. Every year I get free oil changes from buying my car there. So lots of great, great features. And it's the building of these relationships that cause customers to be lifetime consumers of that particular product or brand. So I will never buy a car anywhere else. They've built such a strong relationship with me. I will drive hours and hours to Statesville, North Carolina to buy my vehicle there because of that relationship. So a little more on the personal selling process. It a lot of times seems like a really straightforward process, but there's actually some steps that have to be followed, and these are not always followed sequentially. You may not always use every single step. It does vary based on the situation and the buyer's readiness to purchase. So for example, if I go to Banana Republic or Gap because I want to purchase some new chinos, the selling process is going to be pretty quick. I'm going to run in there and try them on, grab what I want, and boom, I'm out of there. But if Apple is attempting to sell new computers to the whole university, it may take several months to get through that selling process and all those different sales pitches, and it's going to take a little while. So let's take a look at the selling process. And before we do, relationship selling refers to a sales philosophy and a process that emphasizes a commitment to maintaining the relationship over the long term and investing in opportunities that are mutually beneficial to all parties. So we've all heard about the shady salesman that just wants to make a sale to make his quota. Those people do exist. But generally, if you're in sales for the right reason, you're trying to build a relationship. And relationship-oriented salespeople work with customers to find mutually beneficial solutions to their needs and wants. So, what can I do that's going to help the customer that's also going to help me? An example of this is colleges and sports teams. So, a lot of times, colleges will negotiate really long term agreements with these apparel companies to supply their sports teams. So, we may negotiate with Nike for a long term contract so that not only are they guaranteed to get our money for all these years, but we're guaranteed to get their clothing and that quality. So, relationship selling, it's good for both of us. So, pop quiz. Go ahead and pause me here. But I want you to answer this question. Which of the following statements does not describe an advantage that personal selling has over other forms of promotion? A. Personal selling costs can be controlled by adjusting the size of the sales force. B. It's easier to direct the marketing effort to qualified applicants with personal selling. C. Personal selling is less expensive on a per contact basis. D. Personal selling is better for providing customers with detailed demonstrations of all products. Or E. It is easier to vary the message according to what the consumer needs to know with personal selling. The correct answer here should be, good, I hope you're saying C. Personal selling is less expensive on a per contact basis. That is not true. That's not an advantage. Personal selling is more expensive on a per contact basis. Okay. Here's a visual of the personal selling process that you can see. We're going to go through each of these steps together. So our first step is that we want to generate and qualify some leads. Okay, so we're generating a list of potential customers, our leads, and we're assessing their potential. We're qualifying them. And this is pretty cool because if you already have an established relationship with a customer, you're probably just going to skip this step because you already know them, okay? So that's why it's not used too extensively in retail settings. But in a business-to-business situation, it's really important to work continually to find new and potentially profitable customers. So as you're generating qualifying these leads, this may take place in a lot of different ways. You may talk to your current customers. You may do some research on the internet. You may do some networking, like going to a Chamber of Commerce meeting or going to a conference. You may cold call people, either in person or over the phone. You may do some telemarketing. You may link up with people on social media like LinkedIn. Something that's become more and more prevalent in recent years is salespeople actually can curate blogs to go ahead and talk about their products and draw in consumers and generate leads. This is what we call inbound marketing. So people who are interested in your product can go online and start reading about it, and you didn't even have to do anything to instigate that process. So pretty interesting, inbound marketing. Here's a little visual that shows you all those things. So after we've generated our leads, we want to make sure that we qualify those leads to determine whether it's worthwhile to pursue them and attempt to turn these people into customers. And what I mean by that is we want to look for two things. We want to know whether the potential customer's needs pertain to the product or service we're selling, and we want to know whether the lead has the financial resources to pay for the product or service, and that's the big one. The financial resources are the big deal here. So as we're assessing a lead's potential, for example, we might have a client who's looking to sell a multi-million-dollar beach property. And they want a real estate agent to go ahead and qualify the potential buyers first. So the sales agent might go and create some kind of password-protected website that will show floor plans and inside views of the property for the shopping convenience of interested buyers. But before we give you the password to see all that stuff, the buyer must first be qualified as somebody who can actually afford to buy the beach property. So your credit has to be run. We have to make sure that you are capable of getting a loan for this or paying cash for this particular property. And this will save both the agent and the seller the trouble of showing properties just to people who are curious about it who could never actually afford to purchase it. So qualifying that lead is really important in the sales process. Otherwise, you spend a lot of time just spinning your wheels and not actually making any progress. So you have to be careful though, because in a retail setting, this is why I said that earlier that a lot of retail environments don't generate and qualify leads that much. In a retail environment, qualifying customers can be dangerous, and in a lot of cases, it can be illegal. So if you look at somebody and say, gosh, he doesn't look like he could afford to shop here. Oh, this doesn't look like her kind of store. That's kind of a little bit discriminatory and can be get you in big trouble. So don't do that. This generation and qualification of leads typically applies to the B2B sector. We have seen this unethical and illegal discrimination in recent years, specifically with African American shoppers making claims against Macy's and Barney's and some higher level um, clothing stores and retail stores of that nature. Um, so it's important not to qualify leads if you are in a retail environment. And all in all, think about how that would make you feel as well. If you're going to go buy an engagement ring for your significant other and you go in your college casual school clothes, you don't want to be snubbed by the salesperson just because they think, oh, he can't afford to buy a wedding ring. Look at what he's wearing. So think about that and how that might make you feel. Okay, the second step here in our process is called the pre-approach stage, and this is where we use CRM systems. So the pre-approach stage occurs prior to the meeting with the customer and usually kind of helps to extend the qualification of leads that we just talked about. So even though we've already learned a little bit about the customer during the qualification stage, we still might need to conduct a little bit of additional research and develop some plans for meeting with the customer. And this is where, let's say, I'm going to give you a little example that I'm going to use on most of these slides to kind of keep it in reference for you. But let's say with our pre-approach stage, let's say that we are a management consulting firm and we're wanting to sell a new system to a bank that would help them kind of determine checking account errors, help them pinpoint those errors and how they can avoid them. So before we go and have any kind of meeting, and as we're qualifying our leads, we want to go ahead and find out everything possible about this lead, about this certain bank. How many checks does it process? What kind of system is the bank using now? What are the benefits of the consultant's proposed system compared to competitors? And once we do this, once we answer our own questions, we can start figuring out how to establish value for the customer. So in the past, this was a huge pain because salespeople had to keep up with all of this in a little notebook or talk to other people to get this information, whereas now we have customer relationship management systems that track all of this for us. And one of the most common systems is Salesforce.com, where a lot of this information can be found readily available about a lot of different businesses. So that's very helpful to today's marketers and salespeople. So the important thing here about the pre-approach process is that, and I love this quote, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And that's so, so true. So once you've done all this additional research, you can't just go run in there to the customer's office and start making a sales pitch, okay? It actually takes some time. So you need to go ahead and plan out ahead of time exactly what you want to accomplish with this meeting. So going back to our bank example, if this is your very first meeting with the bank, you can't expect them to give you any kind of purchase commitment just from this first visit. But maybe demonstrating the system a little bit and giving a short presentation about how your product might benefit the customer and the bank and how it might reduce those checking account errors, something like that would be appropriate. So once you've determined your goal for the meeting of giving a demonstration of your product and talking about how it would benefit the customer and the bank, next you want to use a technique known as role playing. This is exactly what it sounds like. And you might want to go ahead and act out some kind of simulated buying situation where a colleague or a manager in your office might act as the buyer, and you're, of course, the salesperson. And they can go by and critique and give you adjustments afterward of things you can do differently, and they can play hard to get and give you practice with what to say in certain situations. You need to make sure you practice, and all this is a part of the pre-approach stage. Okay, so obviously once we practice, we're next going to go to the sales presentation, where we actually give the presentation and work on managing and overcoming reservations from our buyer. So once all of our background information has been obtained and we're ready to go to this person-to-person meeting, we don't just go in there and start talking about our product. First, we want to go ahead and get to know the customer, get their attention, and create some interest in the presentation that's about to follow. You want to give them a reason to listen to you and interest them in what you're talking about. Ironically, the beginning of your presentation and how you start this conversation is probably the most important part of the whole selling process. Because this is when you as the salesperson are going to establish exactly where the customer is in the buying process. And we did talk about the buying process a little bit before. It's been a while, so if you've forgotten this, go ahead and flip back over to the Chapter 7 video lecture for me. But we're going to assume for the purpose of this video and this example that our buyer is in the very first stage of the buying process, the need recognition stage. So in this case, it would not be appropriate if the buyer is in that first stage of need recognition. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to go ahead and just run in there and start talking about the pros and cons of all the different suppliers of our product, because doing so would go ahead and make the customer jump to step 4, which is proposal analysis and customer selection. We're not ready for that yet. If we're in need recognition, we need to go ahead and ask a series of questions to help us assess the bank's need for the product or service. And once we've done that, we can then customize our presentation to match the customer's need and their stage in the decision process. So lots of different steps that factor into this. Now, asking questions, though, is only half the battle. Actually listening to the answers of the questions is equally, if not more important, in my opinion. And this is a mistake that a lot of inexperienced salespeople tend to make. They think that to be a good salesperson, you have to do all the talking and just yap, yap, yap. Well, it turns out that that's actually not a good idea. And it's pretty impossible to understand what the customer wants and where they stand and really get in their shoes unless you're listening carefully. So during the course of your presentation, you kind of learn to talk and listen at the same time. But as you're giving your spill, if the chief operating officer comes up and says, "Oh," and he's just whispering, "This, it seems a little expensive," if you're not carefully listening, you won't really pick up on what he's really thinking, but maybe not saying out loud, which is that he doesn't really see the value in what your product is offering. So if you can really listen carefully, though, and you can get a feel for his thoughts and where he stands currently, you can apply that knowledge to help the customers solve their problem or satisfy their needs. So for example, if you did overhear that comment, you can go ahead and explain the features of the system that are going to reduce checking account errors, but you also might clarify how your system's going to add value to what the bank currently has. And talk about, oh, well, we can have this integrated with your system in only 3 weeks, and if you're paying out $2 million in annual error payouts, well, we can improve that by this amount, and our program only costs this amount of money, and show them how quickly they can recoup their investment. So they need to be able to see the value in what you're offering. And in this case, since you're dealing with a bank, it's probably numerical. Another hint for you, and I do this a lot in my lectures, I'm a salesman at heart, but personal selling relies on an old-fashioned skill, and that's storytelling. As a salesperson, you learn how to tell a story to wrap people in, okay? And so even our modern day salesmen might use some advanced technologies and internet-based communication media. Salespeople have to communicate their messages and their sales pitches in different ways that will resonate with their audience of potential customers. So you learn how to tell a story that your customers want to hear. Okay, now after we've given our presentation, the next most integral part of this process is handling reservations or objections that your buyer or your customer might have about whatever product or service you're selling. So, although these reservations can arise at really any stage in the selling process, you probably can guess that they most commonly happen during the sales presentation when you're there talking, right? So, this gives customers an opportunity to raise their reservations pertaining to all these issues, but typically, any kind of reservation they have usually relates to value, like what we were just talking about before, where the price was too high for the quality of service. Now, good salespeople know how to pre-prepare responses for the types of reservations buyers are likely to raise. So, if you were going to a meeting with this bank, as you were practicing through role play with your manager and your colleagues what you were going to say during your presentation, you probably also practiced some rebuttals for the various types of reservations your buyer might have. So, you were already anticipating that the COO might say that the service was too expensive. So you were ready to quip back and say, "Oh, well, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but you're paying $150 million, or whoa, sorry, $150,000 for our investment annually, but you're saving $2 million in error payouts for checking account errors. So very, very quickly, you're going to recoup your money. We can have it integrated for you in 3 weeks with your current system, and we'll be here throughout the whole process anytime to troubleshoot any technical errors you might have." So you kind of help speed up the deal a little bit by anticipating the problem they might have and planning for it. Okay? Now, like with other aspects of the selling process, the best way to handle these reservations, though, is just to relax. Don't get too uptight. Don't freak out. Just listen. And then, to buy yourself some time, something you can even do is ask questions to clarify the reservations. So, as you heard that COO saying, "Oh, it's kind of expensive," you could say, "So you think it's kind of expensive, huh? How much do you think your bank is losing every year in checking account errors?" Even if you already know the answer to that question because you've done your research, you can still ask that question to kind of get on the buyer's level and give yourself some time to think and recuperate before you speak again. That way you're not just babbling. So this gives you both time to think, and it also helps you because you're empathizing with the consumer rather than trying to prove that their reservation or their hesitation isn't valid. You're empathizing with this person. Rather than starting an argument, you're getting on their level. Our fourth step in the sales process is to physically close the sale. This is where you get the commitment from the customer to make a purchase. Now, this is probably the most stressful part of sales because if you don't successfully close, then you go away empty-handed. And that can mean you don't have commission or you're in the hot seat with your boss or whatever it might be. But you have to keep in the big perspective, in the big picture. Losing a sale is probably never pleasant, but if you're really, really involved in a relationship with your customers, you probably view any kind of sales presentation as a part of a progression towards ultimately making a sale, or most importantly, building a relationship. So, okay, we didn't get your business for this certain product, but you might remember us later for another product. Or you might not be ready to buy today, but a year from now, when you've had time to budget and plan for it, you might be. So a no one day may actually be the foundation for a yes another day. And although we presented the selling process as a series of steps, closing the sale rarely follows so neatly. So it doesn't always go in this order, and closing the sale is not always this easy. Okay? Something to take in mind, once you get some experience as a salesperson, you can listen carefully to what your customers are saying, and you can pay attention to their body language, and by reading these signals, you can go ahead and achieve an earlier close. You might not have to go through all these examples. So going back to the bank, if the buyer, instead of being in this first step of the process, if they're not in need recognition, sorry, I can't speak, If they're not in the need recognition stage, and let's say they're in the final stage like negotiation and selection, you can probably go ahead and pick up on that early and go ahead and ask for the sale. Don't waste time beating around the bush. Just go ahead and ask for it. So, and those are things that you gauge with experience. And finally, our fifth step in the sales process is following up. So, really, especially with relationship selling, which is what you should always try to do, your job's never really over. Even when the sale's closed and you've gotten your money, your job's not over. The attitudes that customers developed after the sale, in my opinion, is more important than what happens during the sale because it forms the basis of how that purchase is going to happen in the future. So, this gives you a prime opportunity as a salesperson to follow up with your customer and create a great customer relationship management program. I told you about Flow Toyota. They sent me a card. They called me to make sure I was happy with my sale. They emailed. They call me every year, twice a year. They stay in touch. Follow up is important in maintaining the sales process. Now, there are 5 service quality dimensions that we talked about in an earlier chapter, and these come up again because they are useful to the sales process and they're very useful to follow up. Those 5 things are reliability, responsiveness, assurance, empathy, and tangibles. So, starting with reliability, you want your salesperson to deliver the product on time. Responsiveness, if there are any problems or issues or questions, you want your salesperson and their support group to answer and deal with those problems quickly and efficiently. Assurance, you want as the customer to be assured through adequate guarantees that the purchase is going to perform as expected. So if you said it's going to do XYZ, it better do XYZ. And if it doesn't, you better fix it. Empathy, you want to be able to empathize with your customers. You want to show that you understand the issues and the problems that their customers are facing, and you want to make sure that you can give them what they want and help them get there. And then finally, tangibles. So these are all the physical characteristics of the seller's business. So it can be everything from your marketing communications to your website to the way that you deliver your materials. And you want to make sure all those things are carefully crafted. So, for example, as a follow-up, let's say I've gone into a retail store and I've purchased a new watch. Um, I've already made my purchase, it's already over, and really I don't really care as long as I get my watch. But if I receive my watch in a nice, perfectly wrapped box that's been gift wrapped and it's really nice and neat, um, I'm probably going to be happier than if they just take my watch and throw it in a plastic bag and hand it to me. So these tangibles can signal that your product is of high quality, even though the packaging actually has nothing to do with how well the watch performs or the product itself. So tangibles can be important. So these 5 service quality dimensions that we discussed earlier can all be applied to the follow-up process. I've kind of talked about this a little bit, but effectively handling complaints is also very critical to the future of your relationship. If I'm a customer and I buy something from you and I'm not happy and I complain and you don't take care of my complaints, I'm probably not going to shop with you ever again, right? So we learned in chapter 13 about the heart model and other things, listening to the customer, providing a fair solution, resolving the problem quickly. All those things you learn from the service industry apply here with sales and the follow-up process as well. My favorite thing to do in the sales process is just go ahead and take care of it right up front. As soon as your customer takes possession of your product, or in my case, if you're delivering a service, as soon as your service has been completed, follow up, check with the customer. Are you happy with this? Is there anything else that you need? Or what else can I do for you? This shows empathy and responsiveness, okay? It also shows that the salesperson and the firm care about the customer's satisfaction. So before becoming a teacher and entering the world of education, I worked as a recruiter for a university. I worked at East Tennessee State University as a recruiter, and anytime I helped a student come to ETSU and I recruited that student, I would always check up with them as soon as they transferred. How's your semester going? Are you enjoying it? How are your classes going? Is everything okay with financial aid? Did you get your scholarship? What else can I do to help you? It was my own little form of customer relationship management after having studied business and marketing at the graduate level. I knew that this follow up process was so important to those relationships. Um, Something else you can do in the follow up process is you can follow up with a phone call and call and check on someone. Send an email. If you want to have a pre typed email, that's fine. Or a letter, a handwritten card goes a long way in today's world. Um, so here's an example of a letter that was written here um, from someone, and I can barely read this. It was nice to meet with you about your daughter's dress to wear to your daughter's forthcoming wedding. Blah, blah, blah. So they followed up here. This person's a sales associate, and they followed up. Thanks for meeting with me. Here if you have any other questions. That's all it takes, something short, sweet, and to the point. So go ahead and pause me and take a pop quiz. It tells you here that Morris Hutch sells high volume cooking systems to supermarket delis. He's in the process of selling one of his machines as a replacement machine to a deli manager. Hutch has asked him, when would you like me to schedule the delivery of your new machine? If I'm being asked that question, when would you like me to schedule the delivery of your new machine? In what stage of the selling process would you most likely find me? A, handling rejection. B, dealing with cognitive dissonance. C, the follow-up. D, qualifying the resource or the lead. Or E, closing the sale. Here, most likely you are, hopefully you're saying closing the sale. If I'm asking where and when the delivery should be scheduled, I haven't officially sold yet. That's part of the selling process. I'm closing the sale. It's not quite follow-up because I'm not asking, hey, how's your new machine working? I'm asking, when do you want me to deliver this? Try this one. Go ahead and pause me. Salespeople ensure that delivery schedules are met, that the good or service performs as promised, and that buyers are trained in the use of the product. All of these functions are part of the blank, the final step in the selling process. A, follow-up. B, lead qualification. C, the sales presentation. D, the pre-approach. Or E, closing. Hopefully you're saying that all of these are part of the follow-up process, which is the final step in the selling process. Okay, so we've talked about what it means to be a salesman or a saleswoman. What does it mean to manage the sales force? So, first, let's talk about sales management. And sales management involves the planning, direction, and control of personal selling activities, including recruiting, selecting, training, motivating, compensating, and evaluating as they apply to the sales force. So, we're going to talk about different ways that a sales force can be structured, some important issues in recruiting and selecting salespeople, training issues, compensation, and supervision and evaluation of salespeople. So we're going to go through each of these nice little areas in our graph here. So we'll start over here with sales force structure. So let's say you're putting together a sales force from scratch, and you got to ask yourself some questions. Are you going to hire your own salespeople, or are you going to use the manufacturer's representatives? What are each person's duties going to be? Are they going to have to take orders, get orders, sales support? What are they going to be doing? Are they going to be working together, independently? And if you have never had any training in Salesforce structure, you might be a little overwhelmed by that. So luckily for you, you're taking this class and you're learning how to do these things. So as we're looking at the Salesforce structure, there's two different types of salespeople. Okay, you have a company sales force, which is people who are employees of the company. But then you also have some independent agents, okay? And these independent agents take different names. They can be called manufacturers representatives or just reps. But these are essentially salespeople who sell a manufacturer's products on an extended contract basis, but they're not actually employees of the manufacturer. They're just compensated on commission, and they don't take any possession or ownership of the merchandise. They're just independent agents. And these manufacturers' reps are typically useful for smaller firms or a lot of times for firms that are expanding into new markets. because these companies can usually achieve instant and extensive sales coverage without ever really having to pay for a full-time person. So if they're an employee of the company, you're paying them a salary. Whereas if they're an independent sales agent, you're just paying them for what they sell. So some differences there. Um, Good sales reps have been established, and they typically have a lot of contacts, and they can typically sell a lot of products for non-competing manufacturers all during just one sales call. So while they're on the phone with you, they can sell for two companies at once because they're an independent manufacturer, an independent representative. Typically, the use of these manufacturer reps, these independent sales reps, will facilitate some form of flexibility. It's usually easier if you need to replace a rep. It's easier to do that than it is to replace an employee. And if you need to expand a representative's coverage or contract their coverage in a certain market, it's usually easier to do that with a sales rep than it is with a company sales force. So there's some flexibility along with independent reps. But with companies who already have pretty established product lines, it's more common to see a company sales force. Um, Unfortunately, though, because salespeople are company employees, the manufacturer does normally have more control over what they do. And in contrast, those independent reps, since they're just paid on commission, it's usually difficult to persuade them to take any action that doesn't actually lead to sales. So the manufacturer will have less control over what those independent reps do as opposed to the company sales force, which they can control. So some differences there for your two different types of sales representatives. And here's just a visual explanation of that. We're going to look at each salesperson's duties and what you might have them do. So you might have a salesperson who is assigned with order getting. So an order getter is a salesperson whose primary responsibilities are identifying potential customers and engaging those customers in discussions to attempt to make a sale. Okay, so we're really technical people here in marketing, an order getter, right? We're going out and we're getting the order from the consumer. Uh, Order getters are also usually responsible for following up to ensure the customer is satisfied and building the relationship. So I always like to give you examples to put this into perspective. In a B2B environment, these order getters are usually involved in new buy and modified new buy situations. Typically, they require a whole lot of sales and product knowledge training. So think about Pepsi. In order for a Pepsi salesperson to go to a Safeway headquarters to sell a certain special promotion of Pepsi emojis, they're an order getter and they have to have a whole lot of training on sales and on product knowledge to be able to do that. Order taking um, refers to when the salesperson, their primary responsibility is processing just routine orders and reorders and rebuys for certain products. They're just taking orders. An example of this could be a Colgate employee who goes around the globe into stores and distribution centers that are already carriers of Colgate products. They just go around, they check inventory, they set up displays, they make sure shelves are stocked, they write new orders, make sure everything's going smoothly. That's an order taker. And some people work in sales support, and this is a really important profession. These people just help and enhance the overall selling effort. A lot of times, these are the employees who are responding to technical questions and repairing things if need be. A good example of this would be Best Buy's Geek Squad. So they're there if you experience any computer problems, they're there to help you. They also have a door-to-door service for installation of things. Um, so those are sales support personnel. And then commonly you see people who work in combination duties. So you may have a person who is an order getter, an order taker, and functions as a sales support person all together. A good example of this is Staples. A Staples employee may spend an hour with a customer educating him or her about the pros and the cons of the various systems and then making the sale. In that case, that person would be an order getter. The next customer might come in and just say, oh, I need an ink cartridge, in which case that person would be an order taker. And then finally, the customer might come in and bring a computer and ask for some advice about some problems with their operating system, and that could be um, the salesperson's support role. So a salesperson can have combination duties doing all three. And occasionally, some firms will use selling teams that combine different sales specialists whose duties combine all three of these roles as well, but they work together to service some important accounts. So that's interesting. I will say, though, that as companies become larger and your products get more complicated, it's pretty impossible for one person to do all of these sales functions. It's more common for these to get farmed out into individual jobs for each person. Okay, as we look at recruiting and selecting salespeople, um, this is very important. And it may sound really easy, like we're just going to post a job online, share it on social media, and let people apply, and we're going to hire somebody to be a salesman. Well, it doesn't work that way, and you want to make sure you pick the right person because salespeople are super, super expensive to train. And Zappos, the shoe company, is actually famous for um, finding people that they care so much about finding the right person that if they hire you and they're training you and they end up realize that you're just not perfect or not the best fit for them, they will actually pay you to leave after a few weeks if you're not a good fit. So it is very important to find the right salesperson. And in an effort to do this, a lot of companies have to be careful because there's a lot of biased practices out there, like hiring based on stereotypes instead of people's qualifications. Let me give you an example. So, when you think about somebody selling Avon products, you typically think of the middle aged woman, the Avon lady, right? And unfortunately, though, sales revenues for these products continue to provide salespeople a successful living, prompting women and men to try their hand at selling Avon. So we can't stereotype and just hire women because not all women are going to be good saleswomen. And we can't leave men out because a man could sell Avon too. You never know. So lots of things to consider here. So we can't hire based on stereotypes. We need to look at qualifications. And hiring based on misplaced assumptions about gender or other categories can be really damaging to a company, and quite frankly, it's just discriminatory. So, no stereotypes, hire based on people's qualifications. So, that being said, to try to make the process a little bit more fair, we look at what personality traits and what abilities a person should have. And lots of firms will actually go ahead and give personality tests, but we stress different personality attributes because depending on certain jobs, some traits may be more useful than others. Okay, so for example, impatience could be a really positive characteristic for a salesperson because it creates a sense of urgency for them to close the sale. But for a really big, really large institution like our bank example we were talking about before, an impatient salesperson may irritate the buyer and just turn them off to the sale and kill the deal altogether. So it depends on what you're doing, but these personality tests can be very, very helpful in determining if you have the necessary qualities for a certain job. Here are some different personality traits and things that are generally agreed upon by all managers and experts that all salespeople should typically have. Number one is a good personality. Salespeople are usually very friendly, very sociable, and in general, they like being around people. Um, Customers typically don't want to buy a product from somebody they don't like. That's just common sense. Optimism. Good salespeople tend to look on the bright side of things, which also helps with our next trait, which is resilience. Salespeople often don't take no for an answer. I'm sure you've met somebody like that. They keep coming back until they get a yes. Number four, self-motivation. We talked before about your typical salesperson's job. They have a lot of freedom to spend the day how they like and how they feel that would be most productive. So if you aren't the kind of person that you're internally motivated to get stuff done, it probably isn't going to get done in a sales job. So you have to be very disciplined yourself and motivated. And finally, you have to be empathetic. You have to care about customers, their issues, and their problems in order to really be effective. So here's all of those successful traits outlined here in a diagram for you. Training is also a really important aspect of sales, and everybody needs training. Okay, even though you're going through this program now and you're getting a degree, maybe in business or marketing, maybe advertising, whatever it might be that brings you here to this class, you're still going to need some on the job training if you choose to go into sales. Um, Everything from selling and negotiation techniques for your certain product and service knowledge, training about your certain product, training about technologies that you're going to be using in the selling process, your territory, your time management, policies and procedures that are specific to your company. You're going to need to be trained on all these things. What's interesting is that today, the delivery methods of trainings are changing a lot. A lot of times, on the job training is the best thing because you can actually observe someone and role play and do some real selling or some simulated selling to allow you to get some feedback on your process and making sure you're conveying the correct information. However, the internet and online learning has become a big thing in recent years, and it can actually be even more effective for certain types of training. So if you just need to learn about a new product or a new service that your company's getting, or a change in your company's policies or procedures, or some new selling tips in user-friendly environments, you can get this training anywhere online, anytime, anywhere, which for salespeople who often travel a lot can be really helpful. So you kind of have to look at the cost versus the value of the training. On the job training is probably going to be a whole lot more expensive than, say, an online environment where you can make a video and impart knowledge, or have a training program that requires watching a video and answering some questions and continuing and so on and so forth, taking a test, and then having a set of resources you can go back and access later. So that's probably going to be a lot cheaper than an on-the-job training. So you kind of have to look at your different opportunities there for what you need your training for. Here are all the different types of training that you might see. One thing we also need to talk about is how you motivate and compensate your salespeople. We've said that salespeople often make a lot of money, but how do we motivate them? And that's a tricky question. If we could almost get into some psychology here, but humans are all motivated differently. And as a manager, you kind of need to know what motivates your salespeople in order to be effective. So some people prioritize freedom and they really like to be left alone. Others want attention and they're more productive when they're receiving accolades for a job well done. Other people are motivated by money and monetary compensation. And a lot of times it just varies based on what you're selling. So you have to do some research for your employees to see what motivates them. And although sales managers can emphasize different motivating factors for different employees, the methods that are used to compensate salespeople should be pretty standardized and fair among all of your employees. And typically you can divide these into two groups: financial and non-financial rewards. Financial rewards typically include a salary, like a fixed sum of money that's paid at regular intervals. You might have heard of like a base salary that comes with a sales job. Another common financial incentive for a lot of people that works is a commission. So you're paid a percentage of your sales volume or a percentage of your profitability. Sometimes you get a bonus if you exceed your sales goal or you attain a certain goal. You get a certain bonus that's given periodically, like you might have heard of a Christmas bonus. If you've seen the Griswold Christmas movie, you're probably familiar with the bonus at the end of the year. And then sometimes you even have a sales contest where companies will encourage you to sell as much as you can and kind of compete with your competitors, with your fellow colleagues, to see who can sell the most. And the winner gets some kind of cash prize or some other incentive. So Volkswagen gives a free trip to Germany every year for whoever sells the most cars. So there are different incentives out there. We also have non-financial rewards. Believe it or not, there are people in the world who are not motivated by money. So a lot of good people are just self-motivated. They want to do a good job and they want to make the sale because it makes them feel good. So in this case, recognition from peers or recognition from management can mean more than a big paycheck. An example of this is Mary Kay. So they kind of get a financial reward in that they do get like a pink Cadillac if they have been a high seller, Cadillac SUV, a pink one. But they also publish a little company-wide recognition magazine where individual salespeople and their accomplishments are recognized. That gives them a pretty high symbolic value. Sometimes people get plaques if they're doing well, or maybe a free trip or a day off. Um, in whatever case, if the award can be given at a meeting or publicized in some way, like a newsletter, that's often helpful for people who are motivated by non-financial rewards. So, and this slide kind of summarizes those two things for you. Finally, we want to make sure we're evaluating our salespeople using correct marketing metrics. And the best thing to do is tie this to some kind of reward structure. So just like in this class, if you do what you're supposed to be doing and you learn the content, then you do well on your quizzes and your exams and your assignments, and you get good grades. I reward you with a good grade. So in the same aspect, salespeople should be rewarded and evaluated only for the activities that fall under their control. So a good guiding principle is to evaluate salespeople for what they do and not for what they don't do. Some good guiding metrics, we have objective evaluation metrics and subjective evaluation metrics. When we're talking about objective measures, we look at things like sales, profits, and the number of orders. This can be a little tricky though, and even though this information is useful to managers, it's not 100% thorough because let's say in a scenario you hear that salesperson A generated $1 million last year for the company and salesperson B generated 1.5 million. You immediately think that salesperson B did a better job. But when you look at some subjective measures and you start digging into it, you see that salesperson B, their territory had twice as much potential as salesperson A, in which case you might revise your decision and change your mind to see that salesperson A actually did a better job. So as an objective measure, in addition to looking at sales profits and the number of orders, we also look at things like the profit per customer, the orders per call, sales per hour, or expenses compared to sales as some objective measures. So those are important as well. Now, whereas our objective measures are usually quantitative, subjective measures are exactly what they sound like. You're using really just someone's opinion of another person's performance. And so subjective evaluations can be super, super, super biased and should really be used cautiously and only an objective with a whole lot, multiple objective measures. The best thing to do is combine these two, but mostly I prefer to use objective measures. So we've talked about how you evaluate your salespeople, and that's everything I have for you on personal selling. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to shoot me an email. Hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you.